Gauri, you can start.
Okay. Welcome everyone to India Rural Colloquy. Today's session on New World of Data Science for Effective Public System Delivery will start shortly. But before we begin, we would like to present you the India Rural Colloquy anthem. Sit back and enjoy.
जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हो, जन जन स्वाभिमानी हो, देश में ना रहे गरीबी, विकास ही अपनी निशानी हो। एक क्रांति फिर ऐसी हो, रगों में वही रवानी हो, कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर सबने बस यही ठानी हो। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो।
Good evening to all the session viewers for today. My name is Mala Advani and a very warm welcome to all of you to a very captivating session on New World of Data Science for Effective Public System Delivery. Mark Twain once said, data is like garbage. You'd better know what you're going to do with it before you collect it. Data has become ubiquitous in our lives, from the abstract to the physical, from the analytical to the applied, from the static to dynamic visualization, and from words to numbers. In this deluge of data, contemporary discourse in the development is marked by a paucity of insightful and readily usable data. The effect of this gap is often observed during engagements with opinion makers, policy formulators, and potential investors. The making of public policy goes beyond data. The political economy and social narrative define the contours of public policy. In recent years, public policy and service delivery is seeking the increasing deployment of big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, digital stack, and the emergence of new data sets like from GST, DBT is going to define the nuances and applications. In a welfare state like India, the poor is disproportionately depend on the state for services and entitlements. Careful and calibrated use of data has the potential of changing state-citizen engagement beyond any e-governance effort and ensuring efficiency and accountability of public resources. Data collection in varying magnitude and frequency occurs across all levels of government, but the utility of these datasets is limited despite the considerable allocation of resources. This session takes us to the exciting world of emerging advancement in data science, intersectional with social and behavioral aspects of citizen science, to creatively deploy public intent data accompanied with rapid frequency data for quick public policy rebounds and targeted action. The session will place practical utility and usage of public intent data correlated with high frequency surveys and citizen reports for efficiency and accountability of public resources. Let me begin by welcoming our panel for this evening. Our first panelist is Ms. Priya Nanda, who is currently a senior program officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the India Country Office in the Measurement, Learning and Evaluation team, where she leads a portfolio of research on health systems, strengthening and family planning with a focus on gender, social norms and equity. Prior to joining the foundation, she was the director of Social and Economic Development Group for the International Center for Research on Women's Asia Regional Office in New Delhi, India, from 2006 to 2016. Her expertise includes research measurement and evaluation of women's economic empowerment and access to health services, including reproductive and sexual health. She has had a decade of experience on conceptualizing, designing and evaluating programs for adolescent girls empowerment and was also co-director of the ODI-led research consortium on gender and adolescence global evidence. She has done a BA in economics from the University of Delhi, Delhi School of Economics. Welcoming our second panelist, Mr. Alok Mishra, a civil servant with over 23 years of experience. He has recently joined as Additional Director General, Media and Communication at Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Food and Public Distribution, Consumer Affairs, Heavy Industries and Textiles, Government of India. Until recently, Alok was posted as Deputy Director General in the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office of Niti Aayog, where he oversaw evaluation studies of government schemes, external engagement with international organizations and academic institutions, besides capacity building, competency framework, development, and national evaluation policy. Earlier, he worked as Senior Deputy Director at Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie, where he taught economics, management, evidence-based policy, and media communication. Mr. Mishra has also worked as Director for IITs and IIITs, and later Director in International Cooperation in Ministry of HRD, where he oversaw policy and funding for IITs and IIITs, the National Ranking Framework, Global Initiative for Academic Networks, and Industry Academia Collaborations. Mr. Mishra is BTech in Electrical Engineering from IIT Delhi and a gold medalist of PG in Public Policy and Management from IIM Bangalore and Syracuse University, USA. Our third panelist is Mr. Abhirup Mukhopadhyay, an Indian economist, is currently a professor in the Economics and Planning Unit at the Indian Statistical Institute, New Delhi. He was awarded his PhD in economics from the Pennsylvania State University in 2004. His primary specialization is in empirical research methods applied to topics relating to education, health, labor in developing countries, especially India. Recent topics of research include the economic effects of HIV, AIDS, and cancer, the impact of better school infrastructure on rural schooling attendance, and the implementation and effects of the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. He has previously been the Sir Ratan Tata Senior Fellow at the Institute of Economic Growth and academic visitor at the India Observatory, London School of Economics, London, a visiting researcher at the CHR Michelson Institute, Bergen, research associate at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Last but not the least, welcoming Mr. Swapnil Shekhar for moderating the session. Mr. Swapnil is the co-founder and director at Sambodhi. He is a senior fellow at Development Intelligence Unit, a joint initiative of Transforming Rural India Foundation and Sambodhi Research and Communications. With 20 plus years of experience in international development, Mr. Shekhar leads Sambodhi's vision of generating data and evidence-driven impact. He leads both organic and acquisition-based new business launches. As an expert in development management and research, he has worked with several corporate, not-for-profit, multi-bilateral agencies before starting Sambodhi. Having 10 plus years of massive experience in enterprise implementation, demand creation, and international ventures, Mr. Shekhar has and continues to play a key role in establishing Sambodhi as a promising leader in project management consultancy. Mr. Mitta Sen, who was supposed to join us as panelist today, has asked for leave due to health reasons. Requesting Mr. Swapnil to kindly take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mala, for setting the context. In fact, you did half my job. Thank you, TRI, for this session, because it's quite nostalgic for me. It's quite nostalgic for me. This is the second year, and our own investment in data and data applications is getting fructified through a panel like this. I'm glad that I'm moderating this session. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So to set the context further from where Mala has left, in the recent years, public policy and service delivery has seen increasing deployment of public intent data, including big data. So if you look at applications of tools like machine learning, artificial intelligence, digital stack, and emergence of newer data sets, like if you see the GST, DBT, they have redefined data ecosystem completely. So it wasn't the same when sort of we were sort of 10 years into a business, and the way we are also learning and adapting to this new ecosystem is something that I often find quite challenging. So today's session is built on this emerging narrative. The session is designed to explore emerging thoughts and actions around how data science and its creative deployment in public intent data ecosystem influences public action. So I'd be using the term public intent data quite a lot. So let me define the term for all of us for this particular session. So the way I have understood public intent data for this session is that the administrative data which government is usually the steward of. So this is a part of good public intent data. Then the large scale surveys that say an NSSO would anchor would be part of public intent data. Then even data sets emerging from philanthropic developmental initiatives are also part of public data, because intention is to make it public. So I have tried to conflate these three buckets of data sets, and for this particular session, I'm calling it loosely as public intent data. Let me further deep dive. I won't take more than 30 seconds for it. So the session would try to get into or unpack the kind of structural challenges that we have over a period of last 10, 15 years seen when we talk about using large scale data sets. So this is the time when in the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen people have started talking about improving structural challenges, making data available, or breaking the data silos, or repurposing and reusing publicly available data. We are talking about creating what we call as metadata and data standards, which weren't the case 5, 6 years back. We are talking about creating a data lake architecture like a system where you can actually have the data sets and use it for public action. But we also understand there are many challenges to it, and there is a long journey ahead. So this session will try to unpack the issues about it. Second, the large bucket for us would be a topic that is very close to all of us, that is capacities and competencies. So better use of public data is also is a function of competencies. Value, by value I mean user centricity or UX factor of data, and reach of it. So we'll be talking about, there are conversations and investments around data appreciation competencies in the state, district, and sub-district levels, and also creating a value for stakeholders across spectrum, including public representatives. So this is the broad contour of today's discussion that we have. And I would not waste much time. We have around 50 minutes for discussions today, and then we would be opening up for discussions. 30 seconds of self-promotion. This is also, if you see we have DIU as one of the partners to this initiative. DIU is something that TRI and Sambodhi has established, and Abhirup is also a part of that story. So we would be talking a bit about it during the session, and after the session is over, we have a extension of a session through which we will be launching a couple of products. So you may choose to stay back. Otherwise, this is something that is an extension of the current session that we have. So the way I've structured the session is, I have one question for all of you as a part of introductory remarks. So you can take 4 to 5 minutes and because Mr. Sen is not there, so we have some more time with us. So 4 to 5 minutes to talk about it. The first question, if you see, is that, how have conversations around the usage of public intent data, I have defined public intent data, changed over the last decade or 5 to 10 years? Do you see more discussions on data used for policy and action? What are the 2 or 3 bright spots, and what are the areas of concern? This is more important for this session because you guys have a different locational advantages to respond to this question. So I'd start with Priya, if you can throw some light on it and sort of spend around 4 to 5 minutes on your experiences around it. Thank you.
Thanks, Swapnil, and good evening to everybody. It's really exciting to be a part of this discussion. I don't consider myself an expert, just a learner in this space. So I just want to start with that. And everything that I've learned is more by virtue of either having done research or more recently helped shape investments around evidence, which is my role at the foundation. So Swapnil, I'm going to actually even make it less than 5 years and really look at the last 3-4 years. I think one is an internal trend in terms of how the foundation has taken on to support the data and evidence ecosystem. And we have 2 really formative, robust relationships that have got formulated through the National Data Quality Forum, which is in partnership with Names and Population Council, and then the National Data Innovation Center, which is with NCER. And they've both been very, very productive in raising large public discourse around data quality, data use. And I mean, the number of forums that have happened in even the last 2 years have been immense. More than that, they've created a community of practice, evidence-based researchers, as well as policy makers working with MOSPI on some of these very critical issues, and getting buy-in and acceptance that there is a need to start really thinking about how do you really improve the culture of data use and how that is linked with data quality. And they're just 2 ends of the continuum that kind of either a virtual or a vicious circle. So that's really been important. The second, I think, has been really catalytic is COVID. As a result of the pandemic, what you saw was really a lot of researchers, non-researchers, really coming into the evidence space organically to try and really understand the impact of the evidence, and using very creative ways of looking at data, creating kind of more artificial data sets and cohorts using virtual and mobile means of collecting data, and then having to really be rigorous and more ethical in their data collection efforts as discussions went beyond the first attempt. And we actually helped set up CoreNet, which is a community of practice around that research community. So I think that was really, really important. I'll talk more about the foundational principles of that, but basically it was around the idea of two kind of very beneficial and important aspects around data communities. One is fostering collaborations and really kind of grounding strong principles of governance and ethics around that. And the second was really in terms of optimizing impact of data and data use, and really bringing it to its logical conclusion, which was really for action and for visibility to policymakers. And in that, really using interdisciplinarity, because because of COVID, what happened is poverty and pathology just came up as really important ideas that we had to link. We couldn't look at the pandemic without understanding poverty and all the structural determinants and exclusions, etc. So I think that that trend, or the pandemic, really brought to light what we always logically knew and helped us really build a virtuous community around that. So I think that's, and did you want me to talk about the challenges in this also?
Yeah, a couple of concerns.
Yeah, the couple of concerns which I'll continue to talk about is that while we understood the practical and scientific arguments around data sharing and improving the accuracy of research and harnessing the knowledge gaps, etc., what really came up is the whole issue of people not being been worked in a culture of collaborations before, and therefore a lot of questions came up by the community of researchers around data access, data governance and access issues. Who determines the governance around the access? Is who owns the data and who needs to be informed around data collaborations? What is the role of the state and buy-in of the state in that? Fear of data misuse and challenges of interpreting data without appropriate context. If you're really pooling data, issues of interoperability of data sets, across geographies, time periods, etc. Data privacy, protecting the privacy of the research participants, adhering to data privacy laws. And when you start data collaborative systems, how far back do you go back? And what was the original consent you sought when you collect the data, not imagining its use maybe 10, 15 years down the road? And also, to what extent are data users, data generators really involved in the processes around data collaborations? Is there a second generation or a third generation of users, and how do they connect back to the first generation or the primacy of the effort and the data collection efforts? So I think those are really important issues that came up, which we had to solve for, and it wasn't easy. I can tell you, it went back to legal agreements across organizations. Every organization, the ones that were embedded in states, having their own rules and their own problems and predicaments, and those that were not, having another set of rules and problems and predicaments. So I think we can again talk about that, but what it really brought to light, that while we wanted to promote that culture, it doesn't change overnight, and it's really testing and learning by doing. So over for now, we can go into the second round later.
Yeah, Priya, the fantastic points. I'll talk about collaborations and trust later as well with you. I'm sort of request Alok to sort of throw some light on it and also lean into his own academic leanings as well. So because how academic or academia or training would shape it or respects the use of public data more than what it used to do earlier.
Right. What I have seen is that over last 7 or 8 years, I think there has been this greater buy-in the government, and that might sound slightly skeptical, but being an insider, I can assure you that the government is much more sort of keyed into sort of leveraging data, the potential of data, and especially, with IT revolution being there. I remember the first time, sometime in 2014 or when I was still the director, in Ministry of HRD, and a meeting of by the Department of Economic Affairs was called to understand that why, despite all the good work that we were doing, we were so behind in global innovation ranking. And then when we attended the meeting, and everybody from DST to HRD, all of us had assembled, and we started realizing that the way our data systems are, they are not amenable to sort of collating data, using it for for a very informed decision making. Say, for example, simple, R&D spending is spread across multiple departments, multiple sort of ministries, multiple institutions, then plan, non-plan funding, and multiple other things come in. So there was no way to bring all this data in and then supply this data. As a result, sort of since we could not supply data, we did sort of lag behind, and there was no prioritization to this thing. It may have started with global indices, but a lot of these global developments have led back to sort of strengthening our own ecosystem. 2015, I think, this crystallization of Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office. Now, one could think in terms of a narrow sort of perspective of evaluation, but it was more about creating the sensitization in the ministries and across the states about why data was important and why we needed to sort of not having simple going beyond management control system related data that the government tended to gather, budget utilizations and number of activities undertaken and all those kind of things. Later on, I remember that so much so that the Prime Minister office wrote to different ministries, based on advice that was given by NITI Aayog, Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, that data strategy units are to be created across in each of these ministries, and they would sort of align data. They would show that data can start talking to each other. Now it's still a long way ahead. Like it has already been pointed out, but COVID, I must for all the sort of problems that it created, Priya did point out that how it speeded up that innovation across sort of across everything from data collection to sort of improve acceptance or innovation in methodologies to analysis. Everything just sprang up so nicely and came together. A lot needs to be done, like I said. That's and you yourself pointed out that sharing of data it is quite important, and we need to understand one thing, that the government public intent data, when government is generating, is great, but there are to be checks and balances, and nothing better than a market system which creates those checks and balances, right? And how do we sort of get that? How does government sort of share that data so that it can be utilized by the larger research community for creating usable data? Now, two things that just
Concerns.
in short I'll focus,
Yeah.
and recently what has happened is that more of public policy institutions have back 10 years back or 15 years back, you could count public policy institutions. Probably IMA and B were doing 2 courses on public policy, and IMA closed down. IM Bangalore continued, but later on, now you have ISPs to ISPP to multiple institutions which have come up, and all these institutions do realize the importance of data. Recently, so we have been interacting with ISP, School of Public Policy, Indian School of Business, and then both in Labasna and thereafter, and they have created India Data Portal, which they are saying that okay, all that data is nice, all that sort of, but for a DM out there, district magistrate, or anybody out there on the field, or a SDM out there, or a CEO Jila Parishad, it's important that he has that usable data. How do I sort of bring everything onto him so that he can take more effective decisions? Obviously, multiple things that have been pointed out in terms of data privacy, taking into consideration the context and external validity, they do remain. But we need to understand that all that will happen unless, will not happen unless we start building, capacities in the government all that is happening in the external ecosystem that has to reflect in the governance system, and that has to reflect not only at that has to reflect in multiple levels. That has to reflect at the individual level, officer or the employee. It has to reflect at the organizational level, and then the M&E ecosystem, which includes both the inside and the outside. So that's sort of bit of a long introduction from my side.
But
later on.
But Alok, this is a great segue to what, in fact, I expect Abhirup also to touch upon is academics, and as an evaluator, as an economist, how does he look at this question, and his response may have this kind of a lens as well. So Abhirup, 5 minutes for you.
Thanks, Swapnil, and thanks to Trip for inviting me on this panel. So, as academics do, I'm going to be a little picky on these words that you're using on new world, and stuff like that. So let me tell you a story, and I think this is a very perceptive story of data in India. During independence in Old Delhi, during partition, we had no idea how many people came into Old Delhi, right? And C.R. Rao, the famous statistician, was asked to figure out how many people are there. And essentially using a nutritional kind of, how much people consume, he sampled a bunch of, shops, kirana shops in that area, and he backed out the population of that area. Okay. Now, this required, data sampling. It was for effective public system delivery, because after all, at the end of it, the government wanted to transfer something to this population. So it's not that this is a new world. I mean, India, for its per capita income, has had very strong data systems in place. However, data systems were fairly centralized with, a bunch of people, who are luminaries, V.K.R.V. Rao, C.R. Rao, Mahalanobis. These were guys who were sitting on your data, which was collected scientifically through National Sample Surveys, another great innovation for large data way back in time, right? What tended to happen thereafter is that there are, probably too much centralization. As line ministries opened up, everyone wanted to basically do their own thing because there were specific outcomes they were interested in. And, 5 people could not manage the whole data system of the country. So in the process of that, what has happened is there's an era where each of the line ministries effectively developed a data collection system, which was quite good, to be honest, for the kind of planning they were interested in. So think about the national sample surveys and, poverty estimation. Think about, we talk about education surveys today. I mean, the All India Education Survey has been there from, 50s. There you can even get very detailed data from 80s and 90s. So data has never been the big problem. The problem has been that as specializations increase and line ministries increase, and data collection being primarily, due to historical reasons, a mandate of the government, we develop competencies, but we develop measures and silos which are specific to particular ways of thinking, right? So while data systems, I think it's not a new word. I think what is happening is that as we have realized that we have bifurcated everything too much, now we want to go back to the centralization, right? We want an overall kind of architecture where everything comes together. And what we are finding is that these various silos that have been created over the ages on the health ministry, on the labor ministry, and so on and so forth, they are all defining things in a different way. And this is, essentially exactly echoing what Priya said and Lok said. And now when we are bringing things back, we are finding incoherence. We are finding things that don't talk to each other. We are finding that. So it's not really the fact that we don't have data or we didn't have data. It is basically that, we had very centralized data, then very decentralized data. And now we are trying to again centralize the whole thing into a system and finding that there are gaps. Okay, so that's one. Second, I think that you have to acknowledge that while a handful of researchers were interested in data in important economics questions, social questions in the 80s and 90s, data is now conversation in society, right? Which means that everyone wants to use data, everyone wants to talk about data. I find that while the problems, as we'll discuss today on data exist, I think a lot of this problems in data is about data literacy. Data is not truth. Data is a way where you create a narrative about society, right? And I don't think that everyone is equally competent. This again goes to Alok's point that many of the public policy should be in institutes, people should be taught. I think in general, society wants to use data, but is not there in terms of understanding data. So I will give you one example. For example, take the NFHS, National Family Health Survey. Yes, there are many, many indicators it gives, but you ask any data person and they'll tell you the 3 indicators that you can believe from the National Family Health Survey, right? But social media, newspapers, they will take every particular indicator that's reported, and then suddenly there is this whole discussion about the fact that our data systems are crumbling, now data doesn't make any sense, people who are surveyors are filling up data forms under trees, these kind of considerations. So I think a bit of it is also about data literacy, which I think many institutions should now realize that that's something that they should look at. Yeah. But I'll just make one or two points in the end. I think that there are some very promising things that already governments are doing. I think, for example, I don't know if you are aware of this logistical management systems in the family planning area. It's done quite good in tracking family planning products. It's data. Think about, I visited some state governments in Rajasthan in the state government health department. I saw they were using HMIS in very innovative ways in trying to understand, whether delivery is going as they think, what are the anomalies. So, as pointed out, there are, of course, issues of, quality of data. Government is also aware of it. I don't think it's the case that government doesn't know that. NREGS is another great example where over the years we have gotten better. Right. So,
Abhirup, can I interrupt? And we'll get back to the examples. So it's quite interesting. In fact, as a joke, I would say that it's 20 years of research. I have not been able to find that tree where investigators sit and fill in this questionnaire. So that's the absolute sham. And thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. But otherwise, your point about decentralization to centralization is something that connects me to the next question. And my next question is to Alok around it. And also Abhirup for you, because we are moving towards a world where we talk about integrated economics statistics framework. So it's no more about data on NREGA or any specific scheme. You're talking about sector. You're talking about you're talking about sustainable development. You're talking about quality of life. These are not single indicators. These are thematic areas. So for that you need to have an integrated measurement framework for that matter. And then working across ministries, across departments, there has to be a convening that happens. So Alok, when you talk about, and this also alludes to Priya's point of collaborative, and when we talk about this kind of a system and data requirement, who do you think can convene something of this sort? And what has been your learning? I understand from where you have seen DMU, you have tried. NDAP is an example towards that. But NDAP for me is, for now, it is at least it's just an aggregator. It has to move from being an aggregator to being solution. So I wanted your reaction, and then Abhirup, your take on it as well.
That's right. Great question. Let me sort of start by saying that, ideally, what would you like? Ideally, one would like that, we should be able to bring all the data about an individual or an household as a unit, about everything, so that, poverty as a multidimensional concept or development as a multidimensional concept can be sort of attacked in terms of creating capabilities, that, Amar Sen, works so fondly talk about. Now, what the government has been trying to do, and this is, Abhirup did sort of, mention the kind of silos that, that have happened. The government is now saying that, okay, fine, let me sort of, attack the big problem. So, for example, financial inclusion was one. So, jam, the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile, and then the UPI fintech revolution took place. And then, we were certainly sort of able to do sort of much better than sort of, and then combined with DBT, we were able to, unleash a kind of revolution. Then the government says, the next problem is probably multiple problems are there. While I was in Commerce Ministry, they thought that, okay, fine, again, you have this big e-commerce giant corporations coming in and sounding death knell for, small neighborhood mom and pop stores, right? What do? You come up with the ONDC platform, you provide a sort of equal sort of access to this big market that exists, and all the players across the value chain can come there, so that it doesn't remain a closed system that some of the big corporations may have created. Or sort of you create a health stack, right? Where you sort of go about visualize electronic health records, because you're saying, okay, fine, I need to have everything about a person, individual or a household, so that I can attack that problem. What I'm saying is that now we are looking at data from an outcome perspective, and then coming back to see that what all is required. So starting with initial steps that these individual ministries and silos took that created not only data not talking to each other, data being at cross purposes with each other, different data sets yielding different sort of interpretations. But the government is now saying that, let me talk about the big problems, that ease of living that people face, and then let me start sort of creating platforms which will handle that kind of problem. So that would be my broad understanding about it.
Okay. So in terms of taking this forward to Abhiroop, what's your take on this? And I see from both from policy as well as from other partners in the ecosystem, I see that there is a merit in talking about collaboratives in the space, and there is talking and talking about convenings which can help create. In fact, Priya used the term governance as well. So when you look at this, what has been your experience? Do you think that this is something that is already initiated in the system, or any other experience that you may have?
Yeah, so of course, the NDAP is a good example of a beginning. I think the Ministry of Rural Development is also thinking about trying to get everything together. I think this conversation probably is happening everywhere. So we have two routes now. So one, we could take whatever we have and try to resolve some of the issues. This is not an easy issue, because of course every person, every collecting agency believes people have not done things arbitrarily. They have a certain way of thinking, and they have done it in that way. So as soon as you aggregate up, or at least you try to triangulate, you're going to have a resolution mechanism. I think that this calls for a ombudsman kind of larger kind of authority that either tries to resolve this, or we say that, okay, let bygones be bygones, whatever it is. Let's just get a new structure going and collect data on things which are relatively where we all agree on, and move forward with that thinking. That is probably an easier kind of solution to think about many things. But of course, there will be issues about like things like employment and so on and so forth, where you would still want data sets to talk to each other. So that's one issue. The second issue is, of course, that as soon as you triangulate data, the thing that comes up is the quality of data. When you have one data set, whatever it is, it's you versus a gut feel. When you have two data sets, especially when there are two data sets by the government, then it's not a gut feel. It's basically, we know there's something going on. And, so there has to be some mechanism, we can talk about it later, of trying to figure out which data set, which way of collection. I also agree, Swapnil, I have not met surveyors. I mean, there may be a few here and there who sit under the tree. I haven't met. I think it has to do with many things, many ways of collecting data that people do, many instructions that are given in how to collect data, which create these anomalies, which over time can cause funny things. So I think bringing data sets will create problems, but the problems are the beginning of as you said, a new world.
Yep. So, Abhirup, in fact, I often feel as a researcher as well that somehow digitization puts us in a place where we feel if we have digitized data, this means quality is automatically guaranteed. So, which is not the case. So, digitization as a word is quite jazzy and it takes away the quality aspect of it. But anyways, that's also something that we can discuss in some time. But going to Priya, and Priya, your experience both as a practitioner as well as someone who has worked really closely with the government. I understand you've tried to start collaboratives, you've tried to bring some semblance of governance in this kind of a system. I wanted to understand from you about your experiences, your learnings, and that can enrich all of us. Yeah.
So I'm really talking on behalf of the collaborative partners that that one's trying to foster a community of, so not really the government perspective here. So I think the problem is exactly what has been stated in the administrative data. The data is fragmented and siloed. It's almost like balkanization of a state. There's somebody who's doing this, somebody who's doing that. And our effort was to really reduce the redundancy and optimize use. I mean, that was really the principle. And the ethics is that we should minimize and be parsimonious rather than collect humongous amount of data, because it has a cost eventually also to the respondent. And Abhirup talked about data quality. I mean, our respondents in many settings are very smart because they know ये NFHS के data के लिए आ रहे हैं, इस survey के लिए आ रहे हैं. They've also become savvy respondents, and anybody who's been in the field knows that. You can even go and see the house which has been marked with how many surveys. So you need to be parsimonious even from a data quality perspective. So that was the principle where we tried to really bring together our partners that actually have been collecting a lot of data over time. So one was the data documentation is also not very well, it's kind of poor, because if our principles, the foundation is anchoring these principles in its investment to make data fair, which means it's findable, actionable, interoperable, and reusable, right? So if you use those tropes, then basically what you at the base of all of it is that you need all the data to be well documented, and so that different partners can actually use it. So data documentation is poor because actually mostly researchers are documenting it for their own needs and not for somebody else's needs. And even when data is publicly, shared, often the questionnaires are shared, but there's a lot of other kinds of documentation around the metadata and the specifics that is often not well developed. In order to be accessible, also you need to really set up conditions on who can access, under what conditions. That really goes back to setting up good principles and governance around it. So I think the problem was then we started getting people together. Our partners started asking us questions around who should it be accessible to, who should we get the buy-in from, what is the role of the state, do we have the buy-in of the state, are they involved? That made us think that actually first an important thing is to create the buy-in and create good governance that brings people together. Then is the mechanics and the operational aspects of how does the data actually, how well it's documented, how findable it is within the data system, and whether, once it's accessed, how the data can be integrated across the other data sets. I mean, that's not easy. One data is looking at blocks, the other at districts, something is on nutrition, something is on health system, something else maybe on poverty. The point is, if you really want to use a team science approach and you understand that systems are complex and problems are so complex, you have to really look at all this data together. So that's the real challenge. A priori, the data system and the evidence system hasn't been designed to answer complex problems, and therefore data systems to be designed to be interacting and interoperable. And so, what you are doing is ex post trying to set up principles. Sorry, I just want to say
one question, quick question. So in this effort of creating collaborative, did someone ask or sort of alluded to incentives? Because in many situations, what would be a typical incentive in
Yeah, so it's interesting, like the incentive that we are positing is like the larger beneficence, right? Your data can have much higher level of use, can answer complex problems, can be used to really going to answer second and third generation questions that individually you cannot answer. Now you assume that a researcher is excited by that, but of course the incentive has to also be your time is covered, your cost is covered. And when you go out of that paradigm, which is whether you're covered by a project, then the incentive cannot just be about that higher level thinking. It could be for a professor emeritus of a university, but not for young researchers. So it could be fellowships, it could be publications, but sometimes it's not enough. And some of these problems have not been thought through even by us fully. I think that we could create data use fellowships, that people are really attached to organizations to optimize reuse and use of data, to make it interoperable, because we're all sitting on domes and mountains of data. Until we use it for these kind of complex purposes, we won't really be able to talk about data quality issues. I would challenge whether we really knew how much of NFH is good quality or bad quality. Only when the ones who are using it know that that indicator doesn't work because of this, and because you have a second data set to validate that. And when you don't have that, you don't have a choice but just to use the data that you have. I think I just also wanted to say that the principles and processes of engagement for collaboration are not very clear, and the government has to have a buy-in. Most of the data is collected within the context of a state or a geography. You don't bring in the government partners early on, the credibility or use of that data is also going to be denied, especially if the results are not going to be necessarily positive. So bringing and getting their stakes, their buy-in and their interest, what are the questions you have and how does the data help answer those questions is really important. And I think that sometimes what the data collaborations have also taught us is the lack of interdisciplinarity, right? Like economists are not talking to demographers, are not talking to epidemiologists. So just bringing disciplines together has not necessarily been easy. Sometimes we don't have the same words, confounding versus bias versus something else, different. In econometrics, you use some terminology. In statistics, you're saying the same thing, but using completely different terminology. So it's even like bringing people together to create a common vocabulary and language for collaboration around the science of what we are studying becomes very important. Even the measures, how do you measure vulnerability and how do I measure exclusion? How do you measure vulnerability or exclusion? What does food security mean? Is there a consistent definition? We had to do all of these questions during COVID because we realized nutritionists may be looking at it very differently than economists would. So it really gets down to the brass tacks as well.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Priya. So in fact, we alluded to competencies during the initial part of our conversation. I'd go back to Alok because I understand Alok personally is quite invested in this conversation. So I'll connect competencies with also creating what I call it user centricity of data. So what would a district magistrate look at in terms of value that the data would create? So beyond the transactional decision making that happens on a day-to-day basis. So I try to get your opinion, Alok, on it, because what as a third person, what I've seen in the sector is people have started talking about competencies. You have initiatives where so BMGF is also funded and supported, like FRAC, or conversations around mission Karmayogi. So in your scheme of things, how do you connect competencies with use value that data can create for implementation actors?
Right. So, let me just sort of say a few things before sort of coming to this point, because Mission Karmayogi, everybody is aware of, and as part of it, Capacity Building Commission has been created. And then you have different competency framework, framework, as a framework of roles, activities, and competencies that is being developed by DOPT, and different sort of institutions are working on it. As part of it, like behavioral, domain, and functional competencies, these are three competencies that the government is looking at. over a period of time, these competencies are going to be measured, and the gap between the desired and what is there actually, the training would be done, and the kind of sort of the framework that the government has, that I got sort of platform has been created where different courses has been put, and then this gap will make you understand that what courses to do, and then assessment happens till you have achieved those kind of desirable behavioral domain and functional competencies. Now that sounds pretty great, sort of as far as mechanically or technically sort of talking about it is concerned. What we have done, what we tried to do, sort of as far as the data part was concerned, at two different levels. The first thing was in Lavasna, and I had a great sort of a mentor there, who had much better understanding of these issues. And where what we did is that we started sort of introducing courses where we could sort of make them first thing, give them the importance of data versus the hunch, no kind of understanding that most of the bureaucrats have grown up with, introduce them to the data that it's not such a thing that you need to fear. And second thing is that started telling them about that through various exercises and sort of practical examples as to how sort of this data you could use while sort of you are working in different positions, and what all sort of data systems are, howsoever imperfect data sets already exist, and how some kind of quick surveys could sort of help you sort of achieve or understand, at least have a baseline understanding of what the problem is. We went in the sort of when development monitoring and evaluation office, we went beyond it. We said, okay, fine, that all the capacity building can initiatives are situated within an institutional context, and unless you have a strong institutions, these learnings which are derived from capacity building, they'll also not succeed. So we sort of went on to understand the institutional mechanisms that exist both in the central ministries, that is the central government, and the state governments, and we did sort of large exercise in that, so as to understand those institutional deficits that exist. We have to realize that after a change of planning commission into Niti Aayog, the state planning commission has been sort of slightly directionless. Some states have been able to sort of re-energize them. Quite a few sort of have not. Moreover, all over the world, if you see different systems, so there are different systems, independent sort of data systems, but they're more aligned to the planning, planning, monitoring, evaluation, data systems are all aligned within broadly sort of one coherent kind of department. And so that is one thing. So first we did a systematic study to understand that what are the deficits, and then we started interacting who are the key actors in these things. So for example, in a ministry, when I see there are those joint secretaries or those sort of divisions which head a scheme, right? So there's a scheme that is being implemented. Then there's a economic economic advisors are there. Then there's a statistical department, statistics division that is there. These are the three key departments which come together to sort of energize that ecosystem where data can be sort of leveraged and put to use, because whatever statisticians or economic advisors suggest, and ultimately the scheme division has to take that into consideration. Some of the state divisions like NREGS and all that state divisions have themselves become so strong in terms of their data capabilities, but that's not across the government. All the surveys we did, rural development figured right at the top, but rest of the ministries did not perform as well. Second thing is that we went to the state governments. Now state governments, what happens is that if we have to create this individual and institutional capabilities, we started collaborating not only with these key departments, key departments in the government, but also with the administrative training institutions. And then we brought in the best of the partners from BMGF to UNICEF to multiple academic institutions, and then started sort of creating conversations. for different levels, for junior levels and senior levels, we started to sort of, these competencies were defined. We did sort of, out of some 800 competencies across the world, we looked at some of the best system, and Vijay was, my colleague who did all the hard work. And we were able to bring it down to a very manageable kind of number, which around which we could create curriculums around that, and those curriculums were not to be taught only in a sort of the pedagogy had to be really sort of hybrid pedagogy, and where we started creating those conversations around data so that people are convinced about that data has utility. So, please understand that creating the belief that data can deliver what has not been delivered, so, that is very important. Yeah.
So, but you think these kind of structural changes would eventually lead to the user centricity of data products in at decision making level is something that I allude to.
Right. Please understand that most of the time we tend to concentrate only on bureaucrats, and that's where I'll sort of really urge organizations like yours. Bureaucrats are there for permanently for 35 years, right? Yeah. But it's the politicians who have to come back every 5 years. It's they who have to get into the market of votes, and they have to garner the most number of votes. How do we create starting conversations with them? How do we convince them? How do we sort of create advocacy around it so that we can align data to their incentives? And I think there's a lot of scope that can happen, and then that can again push the bureaucracy to sort of create more user centricity that you're talking about.
So transcending from an operating ecosystem to more authoritative ecosystem where data can be used for decision making, and talking about public representatives as well. So moving to Abhiroop, your quick reaction on this question, and also I would like you to comment on your own belief in creating other innovative mechanisms to validate the quality of data, and looking at user experience or lived experience kind of a model where you use public data, you create user centricity, but also have mechanisms to validate.
Yeah, thanks. So so one reaction and one comment. So one reaction on this politician part, Alok, is that I think that politicians always like data that shows them in a good light and hate the data that shows them in a bad light. So, I mean, that would be true if I were a politician too, right? I mean, let's be honest. I think that the solution lies in decentralizing competencies across the system. And now the problem is that in doing so, we are treating this just like we treat our education system, where we have competencies in terms of what you should reach, what level you should reach, how much you should know. This way of telling people how much they should know because data is useful is not very useful, because most people at the block level and district level take this as one more thing on their head, right? So I'll just give one example of what I saw as a part of an evaluation in Rajasthan, where I'm a very quantitative guy, but qualitative experiences leave me, more, tell me more at sometimes. So I talked to a block medical officer, part of the statistics kind of thing in the health department. And he said the following. He said, this was part of a training, again, competencies and stuff. So he told me, look, when I used to talk in meetings with the district collector, district medical officers, so on and so forth, I would talk about stories. I would say, ki ye ho raha hai, hamare block mein ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai. And he would say, I would look into the eyes of this guy, the district, and see that guy is already looking somewhere else. Yeah. Because wo sara din subah se, he's doing all this. Some guy is going on and on. He said, after I took a training in working with pivot table and just making a chart, I just put up one chart. That's it. I did not even speak. And he said that everyone looked and said, ye kya ho raha hai? Why is it happening? Right? So I think that the point of decentralizing data literacy is to give voice. And, I think that unless we understand that this empowers people at various levels of lower bureaucracy to get a voice, to understand why this is important for them, they will not understand why this is important for the country, man. I mean, this is, we all are individually incentivized in our lives. So are they. I think that this idea that data, competencies can give them voice, can advance their careers, it may not even do it very tangibly, but I mean, imagine in a setting like a block, office, suddenly your district office, one person saying something that is suddenly striking to everyone, showing a GIS map, something like that is like a really big thing. So I think we should approach it in that way, that look, this is not a matter of your competency, this is a matter of empowering you to have voice in decisions at the decentralized level. On the quality part, I have my view about this is that, I think one of the reasons why data is facing such problems at all levels is that people are not able to, in some sense, relate a lot of data that comes out with their lived experiences, right? I think that when I talk about, some of it is because, of course, there are tiers in society and the average is sometimes a bad reflection of, anyone's life. But I also think that that's because a lot of data is being created, which unfortunately is not very accurate or does not accurately describe a person's, as Swapnil said, lived experiences. So I feel that a process in place where one can crowdsource and get an additional data validation procedure. So think about, people in a village, or this could be using, some notion of social audit, but maybe a little more decentralized on the quality of, like put stars on the quality of your school, right? If you don't like your school, put a 1 star. If you like your school, put a 5 star. These are kind of things that will tell us more of whether the local school is functional vis-a-vis, one other data that is collected, some years not collected, some years, DICE data that does not measure output, so on and so forth. So I think that, when you are going to collect data and you say, and government data is often accurate about things, it should correspond on a parallel system of being able to, a system in place where people who live in particular areas are able to relate to that data and verify that it actually reflects some notion of welfare. If, for example, something says this school is functional according to student-teacher ratio, the particular residents of that village should also be able to, or the NGOs who work in that village should also be rating that school high. And then you will get, people will say, okay, this DICE data makes sense because look, there is this parallel system that also seems to rate these places better. So we have to create these systems, otherwise, and it's possible to do so as we go granular, because you see, till we're producing things at the district level, I mean, who will evaluate whether a district is doing well or not?
Yeah.
It's a big entity. So for a village, you can.
Yeah. So great to hear this from you as an evaluator as well. I've worked with you for long, Abhirup. Going to Priya, your comments or your experience around creating use value for the last mile and also for the functionaries. I'll also include civil society in it, the way you engage with civil society and other implementation actors beyond the state. Yeah. And the second part, looking at the time that we have, so let me conflate 2 questions here, Priya. And second part is that when we talk about creating use value, there is a strong presence of technology these days. So use value, and also I'll club equity into it. When you talk about, because Abhirup has alluded to lived experience, I'll come to equity in terms of sharing data. So the first question to you is around creating use value for the last mile, connected to culture as well, but I would not go that deep. And second point is how technology can be an enabler towards making sure that data reaches to the last mile.
Okay, so I mean, I think data use or use value is such a large construct, right? Like, so use for whom? One user is your policy maker or a practitioner within the government program. Yeah. Now, what is happening is data, largely administrative data, is not telling a story. Often it's not even telling an authentic story. So taking data and translating into really actionable insights for different users within the system, I think it needs a certain skill set or data intermediaries, which probably don't exist in the level. That capacity is missing within the system. Either we begin to train, medical officers and data entry operators and ashas and everybody who's touching data on what is its use value. I mean, that would be the optimal state to be in, but it's going to be a while. So minimally, what you need is people who can really translate data, tell its story, and let it be used by people who need to use it in a more real-time setting, right? Not like 1 year later or 2 years later, or not like off and on. So I think that capacity within the system is missing. The layer that can help that layer is very thin and sketchy. So that's one thing. The second way we talk about use value is the ultimate person whose data is being used. How often do we connect back to the respondent or the citizen? Now, one way to connect back to citizen is not just crowdsourcing but the data, but also making the data metrics and parameters available and shown or displayed, that you can say this many hand pumps have running water in our village, and you can change that, or you can redlit that as many services are available, have been used. You can make certain metrics available and broadcast it. It also can be used in a very electoral way, but we don't necessarily use data in a very scientific way to engage with the citizens, and therefore the citizens don't use data or engage with data also in a scientific way. So we've kind of isolated the citizen from data, and we treat our citizens as if they don't care or they don't need the data, but they do, and they do care, and they use it, but then they use it like what we call fake news. It's coming from ways which we don't think are authentic. So I think data use, if we are very serious about it, it is about a culture. It is about the culture within the health system. It is about the culture in which we live, how authentic it is, how real it is, how much we care about it. I just also wanted to talk about authenticity in another way. See, who is producing the data? How much do we care about whether she's overloaded? What is the culture in which data is being collected and reported? What are the systems of accountability? I can talk about the health system, less so about the education, but the accountability is always downwards. There is a punitive culture. So as a result of that, performance can be fabricated in ways so as you meet what is requested of you. That doesn't mean it's authentic data. It's only when you do data validation exercises or crowdsourcing, you will get to know how many deaths were there in this village, or if the media comes in, because they do occasionally during epidemics, that you get to really say that, the data that you have is not authentic. So you actually have to change the culture from being punitive to be supportive, so that the accountability is really distributed. Then you're going to begin to see it's not about digitization, because digitization is only going to get you digitally what is actually being collected physically. It's not going to solve the problem of punity or lack of supportive supervision or distributed accountability. That is a cultural shift. So I think that digitization is good. We need to talk about how literate are digitally literate are our data collectors, largely ASHAs. I think maybe 60 to 70% in some of the states are not digitally literate. There are other people who are helping them collect the data on their smartphones. So that's not really helping solve the problem of authentic data or reliable data. So I think if we are serious about it, then we have to really think through. Maybe for some time, digitization is going to help, but there'll be need for parallel physical systems of supportive supervision that need to accompany it. And so technology can only be a solver if other systems in the physical space are also helping solve for the poor quality. Otherwise, it's not going to be a solver. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. This is something that is music to our ears, because in the field we realize this every day. I remember we were working with a district, and we had this sexy thing about outcomes thinking that we wanted to train people on. We went with a module on outcomes thinking, and no one bought it. The moment we started talking about Excel and having quick modules on Excel, it was oversubscribed. So because we're talking about data which is of immediate use for people. So going back again to data and technology, Alok and Abhirup, quick reactions on what Priya mentioned. And one last question for all of you. If I or say DIU as an agency, we want to engage with, say, state or sub-state level, and create some kind of a need for a commissioner or a collector to have a user experience. What does it take? So for him or her to understand that the data that his or her constituency or district generates can be used for actionable purposes. So what does it change, or how will we as researchers, evaluators change that? Any two sort of comments, suggestions will help all of us in the room. We'll close with this question.
Hello, go ahead.
Yes. Understanding, I was just wondering that how do you sort of translate data into usable kind of formats? And Priya did sort of allude to it, that how do you sort of bringing those data intermediaries out there? And I think that this is a job which sort of which not only sort of research institutions which have been there for quite some time, but the academic institutions which are venturing into public policy with a lot of focus on data, the public intent data, they can do. Professor talked about, Abhirup talked about that, they talked about everything, all the great stories, but once, some kind of pie chart or a pivot table was brought in, everybody just sort of started sort of talking about it. I really appreciate sort of the point that has been raised by Priya about that all those people, what are the incentives that lie for all those lower level lower level functionaries who are generating data, and why they should not have any incentive to manipulate or not manipulate data. And those things need to be sort of considered, especially in a hierarchical and punitive kind of system. Now, said that, given that, I would still think that, we need to slowly, this will take a long time. It's not something that can happen overnight. We need to start training more often than not. The training in India has been confined to the senior civil servants. This happens, nicely at LBS, NNA, or some big sort of for class 1 officers. Training actually doesn't happen for people out there on the ground. That's where sort of we should be able to energize that ecosystem of ATIs, administrative training institutions, which may have, some of them may not be so active, some of them are extremely active, to start sort of building that sense of that importance of data, integrity of data, and how to sort of ensure it, and bringing that perspective that how data visualization somewhere gives more meaning rather than reams of, because tables may shock people, but that data visualization, and that has to be, so all the data intermediaries have to do is that they have to start sort of focusing on districts or the divisions if a commissioner is there.
That's great.
And then sort of start sort of giving them into visual formats which can be easily sort of understood. Because visual that removes that communication gap that exists across. People may understand data or may not understand data, but visualization is something that cuts across.
Glad to hear this. And Abhirup, your quick take on this, and then last comments from Priya.
Okay, so on digitization, no one can disagree with what Priya said. I just want to point out that sometimes bad things lead to good things. So when we started having the MIS, we realized that the data was completely crazy, but that was a good thing because it was always crazy. It's just that we never saw it. So when we first saw the MIS on the NREGS, and we said this is all crazy data, this was exactly what was happening for 30 years undocumented, right? So that has led to developments on its own. So I think the digital thing has to go on. It's just that we have to take it with a pinch of salt. It has its own role. The second part I want to put is in terms of these how to use this data at the district level, and whether one of the big problems with data is that now when performance is linked to data cannot remain objective. When I remember going to NREGS meetings where everyone is saying, all our people are working on jobs, Till someone said, isn't that a bad thing? Because NREGS is only for places which are doing really bad. Then everyone said, oh, no, there's nothing. Next year, everyone was not working. We have an architecture in our system where at least we had tried in the past to have data collection systems which are parallel, though they're still part of government, a parallel system which, is not completely driven by the particular ministry that is, collecting the data. I think that we have to retain some aspect of that. If we feel that all the government agencies are ultimately, for example, if there's contestation on data, then always Ministry of Health data will always be sacrosanct on health data. Then of course you can't solve the problem, because if you have asynchronous thing, then essentially the provider of the service then provides the data, and that's crazy.
Yeah,
I think that's where civil society and this data kind of crowdsourcing will have to play a role in giving some sanity check on, in progress. If district collectors report progress, then there has to be a system, but that system has to be more than just people writing on Twitter. That has to have some authenticity from the government, that is a parallel system. You can almost think of it like a Panchayati Raj system next to a bureaucracy system that puts some discipline on what you can say based on admin data.
Yeah, that's great. These are great points. Priya, your last comment on this conversation is turning out to be quite interesting. Before we started the conversation, I thought no one would hear us because data conversations are usually boring. So we close this session with your last comment, Priya, and then we take questions.
Okay, I actually don't have any last comments. I mean, it is really, when you talk about data, you're talking at so many levels. I think like one of the things that I forgot to say is that often when we're looking at data, especially like the last mile data that you were talking about, we kind of look at the value of data, or good data as complete, or the frequency is met, but not around accuracy, right? And what is the definition of accuracy? I think that is also a culture shift, right? Why we accept complete as a good thing and inaccurate as doesn't matter. This is not just about the last mile. It's generally again about culture, so news, fake news, authentic news. Like we are just buying things and consuming things that are in abundance, which are not good quality and accurate. And so I think the consumer has to be much more discerning. And consumer can't just be researchers. It should be everybody who's consuming and caring about the data that's being meted out to them. And they need to demand better quality data. So that's all.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Priya. Thanks, Alok and Abhirupa. We have a few questions. I have around 12 minutes left. Sorry we overshot. I thought Mr. Sen's absence would give us this luxury, and I took that luxury very comfortably. So let me have a few questions from the audience. I have around 4 to 5 questions. I'll go through it quickly. So there is an interesting question especially in context of rural. I'll read it out. How to make available relevant real-time rural market data to local communities for their planning purposes. So Abhirup, if you can take that question.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. I think that Priya's idea of posting few public goods, what the data is saying at a particular frequency is feasible. NGOs going back and saying that, that the particular, district collector believes that their village is doing well based on some data is feasible, to which villagers can respond. Otherwise, you are assuming a level of sophistication. I'm struggling with even the idea that people can, go online and crowdsource. I mean, people getting real-time data. Of course, real-time data exists. I mean, you can go to Mission Info there. You can click 2 buttons and you will get, what development changes have happened in the last 3 years. But if our rural population was at that level, then, then many problems would not exist. However, this is a strong possibility in at least, I would say, 25 to 30% of our villages, which are actually not that as underdeveloped as we think they are. Many of them have internet connections. Many of them have a lot of literate people. And so it is possible then to make this kind of information, more known that this data exists at that level. But ultimately, it's a matter of, there's a lot of data out there about your and my life, Swapnil. When do we go and check? We only go and check, like, I check voting data. I have a voter card, but it's got someone else's face. I tell myself, he can vote karne denge na. So, karne denge. So I said, okay, fine, let it be someone else's face. So, I mean, that's the way everyone responds to data. No one has any, it is only when it's useful. Like, for example, NREGA. People want work. If someone is saying there is no demand for it, it is, then up to people as well as NGOs to point out that, look, you should say something, because ultimately the government side is saying that you have not demanded work and therefore there is no work, right? So at that level.
Okay, so one other question is around something that we've already discussed, and Alok and Priya, if you can quickly respond to it. So the question is, analyzing data is one thing, often seen. Gathering of data happens at grassroots level, community cadre. How do you ensure quality data comes into the system as being processed? We talked about motivation, we talked about incentive, but given everything, we are collecting data from the grassroots cadre. So if these are the constants, at least for the shorter term that we are looking at, how do we nudge changes? So I'm not talking about something big, but I'm talking about if we have to create these nudges to improve data quality from the last mile. What can be those nudges?
Priya, would you like to go first?
Well, some people would, I think what you're asking me, how do you improve data quality that's coming from the last mile, right? Some people believe it's a behavioral issue, right? As that you can change individual attitude, motivation, behavior. I have argued just now that it's a structural issue. So I would still say that till we solve for some of that structural issues, perhaps the behavioral solutions come next. So building capacity, competency, understanding why you're collecting data, how it will be used is part of the story. But part of the story is really shifting the systems of accountability, which is structural. So it's a two-sided answer.
Yeah.
Both are important. Alok?
Right. Just to sort of, add to Priya, absolutely great. But, I would also like to sort of, talk about what Abhirup has been emphasizing, creating, parallel sort of streams of, getting the data. Once you create competition, the integrity has to, over a period of time, perforce improve, because otherwise the dichotomy will show up for everybody to sort of see that there's something wrong. So, creating the competition, getting it through multiple sources. It could be social audit, it could be in other institutions, or it could be sort of other, agencies doing it, but to something which can be validated through the government, but at the same time, is parallel to what is being officially collected, will serve as a good competition and remove some of these anomalies, which automatically sort of, we may not be able to change human behavior, but market systems have a way of improving human behavior in ways that we don't understand.
Thanks a lot. There were a couple of questions around how media and data can work together, which I'm not asking to this group because I also personally don't see much value in this discussion at this juncture. But if this room and participants here, if you have any questions, we can take one more. Otherwise, we'll close the session. You're good?
I just want to add one point. Sorry, while you're still soliciting questions, I was just thinking, if we think of community as composite geographies, and there are metrics like 20, 30 essential indicators that get listed and shared back, is there a way that you can actually evoke pride in what people are achieving? So it's not even what the system does, it's all of us, right? Like, for example, hygiene. I've been to village, there's some village in Meghalaya which calls itself the cleanest village in India. So, for example, are there some, or like the best performing school in the district, are there things that citizens can take pride of and be partaking in that? I think part of this creating polarization and binaries between what system needs to do and what people kind of suffer, or I'm not being unsympathetic, but I'm just trying to also be solution oriented. It could be an experiment that we try and say that how do you share data of critical indicators that the citizens believe that they want to own and take pride in?
Yeah. So the entire conversation around place-based initiative and citizenry is around it, and we have several initiatives around it. And in fact, Alok, the other day you were talking about champions, identifying champions, and helping them take this forward. We have one last question, and the question is from Sandeep. Sandeep, please go ahead.
So I speak through here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So more recently, I'm talking about maybe the last year and the year before that, there's been a lot of talk in the Urban Development Ministry, which is MAHUA, on making whatever data that they collect open to the public domain, completely open to public scrutiny, especially for their long-standing products like the Swachh Sarvekshan, which started in 2017, as well as the Smart City Missions Livability Index and so on and so forth. The thought of the secretary there was that to bring this data completely into the public domain, and the pressure from civil society through RTIs, as well as pressure from the public at large, who will challenge the type of data which is being given by the city administration to the national level for, eventually will get so large that the pressure itself will force a sea change in the quality of the data being reported, because it's being challenged and it's open to public scrutiny. Do you think this is something which is feasible in India? Do you think more ministries are going to fall in line and make the data which they collect open for public scrutiny, and therefore through checks and balances improve the quality of data being reported?
That's a fantastic question. Quick response from all of you.
If I can go first, I think that's a feasible idea in an urban space, because you have people who can, when the data is released, there's a media following it. There are people who are kind of rights oriented. I think in rural areas, some of the problem is that there is just to make people aware of their rights is being for example, the NRHS data has been up there for many days, and people with names of people. It's not that it's not easy to identify, but it's been very hard to get people to file cases. In fact, that's a right, and yet, the NGOs have to really, request these. Most people are not interested in that. They're ultimately interested in ki finally milega ki nahi, and there is a bit of a Mai Baap Sarkar kind of attitude. They feel that going against this would will make it harder for them to get work or these services next time. I think urban spaces are different in that respect.
I would believe that, going ahead with making data public is going to be a great thing. For two reasons. First thing is that, it also makes the data collecting agency aware of the fact that this data is going to be released. The very fact, that very understanding, that feeling makes them sort of, not go haywire. That is one thing. The second thing is that once the data is released, probably the government may not be able to use it, but, use it, maybe you able to use it in one way by bringing some kind of rankings, but multiple other institutions, researchers, civil society groups will come up with multiple they'll slice and dice data to come up with multiple interpretations, and that will lead to much better, much deeper, and much nuanced conversations in the society. Now, I do understand that it will happen at the urban level, but states where the political mobilization has been better, like Kerala and all that, will do probably much better, but some of the other states may not up in the north may not do it over a period of time, but this is a process which will pan out over a period of time, and it would be good. It would be great.
That's great. Priya?
Nothing that striking
to
add, except to say, I think social media is turning out to be quite a leveler, and sharing data in creative ways. So I see alternative, there are organizations that are doing that already, Agents of Affairs, Point of View, News Laundry. People are using data and putting it out on social media. So I think it's a big leveler over time.
Yeah, but people are also misbehaving with data.
I agree.
Right? That's the other problem.
Yes.
Yeah. So
crimes and misdemeanors of data.
Yeah. I'll close with positive sides of social media than actually the how we are misusing social media. Thank you all for the fantastic session. I have personally learned a lot, and the way it has been thought-provoking, starting from the fact that we talked about how decentralization to centralization is happening in data and how it poses several challenges. Then we talked about this, the thing that I liked about how accountabilities have shifted. It has to be distributed accountability more than centralized accountability. And then we talked about training and on-the-ground training and how we can improve accountability through that as well. And essentially user centricity of data can be improved through that mechanism as well. I'll close this session on a positive note, thinking that we are at a cusp and we see there are positives to digitization. There are flip sides to it, but we are at a cusp where we are talking about creating or breaking the silos, which is the first step towards creating much better value for the data that we have. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.